Hello.
Tim,
Yes.
hi. I'm going to have to record this and hope it works.
Okay.
Having more family drama.
Okay. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you. Very stressful. Take care.
Can be. I understand.
That's why I wanted pets, not kids.
Yeah, that's true. I have to admit, our cat Barry does not cause us a great deal of stress.
Exactly. Take care.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye. Chicago. Well, hello, those of you who are here on time. As you know, I always give everybody a few extra minutes to get here, but thank you for being on time. Hope everybody's doing okay. I don't know. All of a sudden it got dark clouds here and it looks like we're going to maybe have some rain or a storm. I don't know. We'll see. And I don't know for everybody else, but it actually kind of got cooled down here late afternoon. I could actually sit outside on the porch without breaking a sweat. Sat outside on the porch and just read for a little while. Welcome, everybody. One by one, welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Tim.
You are welcome. It's, like I said, it's kind of dark and gloomy here. Last week, for those of you in Torah study, my power went out about 25 minutes into it. So
I remember.
who knows what might happen tonight? Because all of a sudden I had a computer and then I didn't. And I thought, oh no, I hope the computer didn't die. But then I looked around, I could see all the clocks were off. And I thought, okay, so the power was out. But luckily it came back on within about 4 or 5 minutes. So
Yeah, we have heavy thunderstorm warnings in the Sun City area.
really, yeah, I can see, I mean, looking out, I could see some pretty gloomy looking clouds. It's not doing anything here yet, but for after being a nice, pretty sunny day, all of a sudden it's kind of taking a turn here. So
Yeah,
we'll see.
nothing here either, Tim. No rain yet.
Yep. Well, it may start while we're discussing Rosh Hashanah, maybe a sign from God. I don't know. We'll see.
Not here, it's sunny and 78 degrees.
Oh, that sounds lovely. 78 and sunny. Oh, wow. I can't wait till I can walk outside my front door in Savannah and say, oh, it's 78 and sunny. That's my favorite weather. Give me, 70s, sunny, maybe a nice little breeze, sun, a few clouds. I mean, I don't want much. I just want perfection. That's all. Low humidity too, low humidity. So, well, as you can guess, we are madly at the office, madly gearing up for High Holy Days, which seemed like, oh, they're a couple months away. And now all of a sudden, oh, they're not a couple months away anymore. They're getting closer and closer and closer. So the preliminary work beforehand is a lot. It's a lot. Okay, I'm getting everybody 2 more minutes at 6:35. We'll get going. I know I sent handouts and there were a number of them. There will be some next week with Yom Kippur. This is the disadvantage of not being in the synagogue for classes, because in the synagogue, I could have just handed prayer books to everybody and we could have looked at the items in a prayer book. But since we don't have that option right now, it's kind of the only way I can make sure people have some things to look at. A couple more people who said they were, they emailed me and I emailed them the information, said they were going to join us tonight, but we'll see.
We're here. We're here. We're just having trouble with our Wi-Fi video, but we're here. We're
Okay.
gonna try a different device, but we're here.
I can see your name on the screen, so that's good. I mean, can't see a face, but I can see a name on the screen, and that's okay. Some people are shy. They don't want to show themselves.
We'll show ourselves as soon as our Wi-Fi cooperates.
Oh, the wonders of technology. Okay, well, I'm going to mute everybody, and if people come in and join us a little bit late, that's okay. Welcome for being here. Thank you for being here tonight. As we kind of take a closer look at the High Holy Days, and specifically this evening, we're going to be focusing on Rosh Hashanah. And Rosh Hashanah, of course, one of our High Holy Days, one of the most important days on the Jewish calendar. And we're going to start tonight. I'm going to read a little excerpt from the Torah. I didn't put it on your sheet, but just listen, because this holiday is commanded, as is Yom Kippur. Both of our High Holy Days are in the Torah. We take them directly from the Torah, commandments from God to celebrate them. So if you want to look it up later in your own copy of the Torah, this is from Leviticus. It's chapter 23 in Leviticus. And interestingly enough, it starts with verse 23. So chapter 23, verse 23, and then it goes to verse 32. But I'll just read it so you can hear what the Torah tells us here. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the Israelite people thus, in the 7th month, on the 1st day of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a sacred occasion, commemorated with loud blasts. You shall not work at your occupations, and you shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord." The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Mark the 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. It shall be a sacred occasion for you. You shall practice self-denial, and you shall bring an offering by fire to the Lord. You shall do no work throughout that day, for it is a day of atonement, on which expiation is made on your behalf before the Lord your God. Indeed, any person who does not practice self-denial throughout that day shall be cut off from his kin. And whoever does any work throughout that day, I will cause that person to perish from among his people. Do no work whatever. It is a law for all time, throughout the ages, in all your settlements. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you, and you shall practice self-denial. On the 9th day of the month at evening, from evening to evening, you shall observe this your Sabbath." So there you have the Torah telling us that we must celebrate Rosh Hashanah, though it does not use the word Rosh Hashanah, and that we must have a Day of Atonement, and those form our 10 days of awe that we have from Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. So these are High Holy Days that we are commanded to celebrate by God. They are directly in the Torah, so it's kind of important that we remember that. However, the word Rosh Hashanah in Hebrew does not mean Happy New Year, as you know. It actually means the head of the year, the head of the year. So when we talk about Rosh Hashanah, we are talking about Rosh is actually the word from the word for head, and Shana, of course, is year. So head of the year is the actual name of the holiday. The words Rosh Hashanah never appear in the Torah. Never anywhere in the Torah is the day called Rosh Hashanah. We're commanded to celebrate it, but nowhere in the Torah does that term ever get used, interestingly enough. We saw in what I read from Leviticus, they do talk about Day of Atonement. The name of Yom Kippur is clearly there, but we never have the term Rosh Hashanah. Oftentimes in the Torah, you will hear some, they'll call it the Day of Remembrance. And if you pay attention in the prayers of the service this year, you will realize that we also call it the Day of Remembrance, or Yom HaZikaron. And so when you hear prayers, pay attention, we oftentimes hear that term as well. So when so where did Rosh Hashanah come from and when did we start using that term for the holiday? Well, we know that the holiday, history tells us that the holiday was well established by the 6th century BCE. So we have been celebrating this holiday for a long, long time. But the actual term Rosh Hashanah did not come into wide use until the year 200 CE, where it's recorded for the first time in the Mishnah. So we were celebrating this day for a long, long time, long before we actually used the term Rosh Hashanah. But we did use the term Day of Remembrance, Yom HaZikaron, and it was commanded that we celebrate it in the Torah. So it's kind of an interesting history here when we realize that God commands us to celebrate it, but we never get this name until many, many years later after the holiday has been celebrated. So that's just a little bit of that history there behind Rosh Hashanah. Now, it's actually a birthday. Rosh Hashanah is actually a birthday. Whose birthday are we celebrating on Rosh Hashanah? Well, it's not God's birthday because God's been around and been there since the very beginning. So we don't celebrate God's birthday. It is actually considered to be the birthday of the world. So we are celebrating the birthday of the world on Rosh Hashanah, because according to the rabbis and sages who long before us studied these things, the reason they call it the birthday of the world is because they say that the month of Tishri, which is the first of Tishri, is when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah. That is the month when God is said to have created the world. So if we're going back to the very beginning, God created the world in Tishri, so it is the birthday of the world. So not only are we celebrating Rosh Hashanah as a new year, we are actually celebrating a birthday at the same time. So we have Yom HaZikaron, Day of Remembrance, we've got Rosh Hashanah, head of the year, and we've got happy birthday to the earth, happy birthday to the world. So it's kind of interesting that all of that comes together as we begin the month of Tishri, because that's the first day of the new Hebrew month on the calendar. Now, in spite of all that, we do change the year at Rosh Hashanah. We start the new numbering system for the new year at Rosh Hashanah. So we will be going into the year 5781 when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah this year. So that will change when we are actually in the synagogue celebrating. We are now in the Jewish year of 5781. Now, you may surprise you that Judaism actually has 4 different New Years on the calendar. Rosh Hashanah is one, so that is one new year. Now, Nisan, the month of Nisan, for those of you who may have been in my Hebrew calendar class a while back, the month of Nisan is technically the first month on the Jewish calendar. Tishrei is not. Nisan is the first month, so technically that is a new year as well, because we are starting the cycle of months all over again. So that's the second new year. The third one is what we are going to start on Friday. Friday evening at sundown begins the month of Elul. And Elul 1 is considered a new year because biblically that was sort of the start of the fiscal year when you had to pay your tithes and your taxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that was another new year. So we've got 3 new years. The last one we have actually turned into another holiday in modern times, and that was on the 15th of Shvat. Shvat was celebrating more earth and nature, and especially trees. And so that has now become our holiday of Tu B'Shvat, where we remember and we celebrate the trees. So we have 4 chances in Judaism to welcome a new year. So if you really want to, you're into new things and new beginnings, you've got 4 opportunities in Judaism. Clearly, none are quite as important, though, as Rosh Hashanah, our birthday of the world, that we are about to celebrate in the next month or so. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing to know, that this is not the only new year that exists on our Jewish calendar. And remember, if any of you have questions or a comment or something, feel free to unmute yourself or wave at me. If I don't see you, just unmute yourself and say, excuse me, and feel free to jump in with a thought, a comment, question at any time when you feel the need to. All right, so there we go. Now, Rosh Hashanah, there are some who say that Rosh Hashanah is sort of like, and through Yom Kippur is sort of like a court case. And God sits as the judge in this court case. He is the one who is going to sit in that big seat, like you see in a courtroom where the judges sit. I'm sure you've seen Judge Judy. She gets her great, desk and her big chair up there. God is said to judge all creatures, and that includes all creatures, not just humanity, but God is said to sit in judgment for all creatures on those 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we are entering, when we enter into services and we begin the service and the prayer, we become a part of that court case that will last through Yom Kippur, when the court case and the final verdict will finally be rendered. Now, the court case in this is really all about having our names inscribed in the book of life. And for those of you who are familiar with many of the prayers of the Rosh Hashanah service, the idea of having your name inscribed in the book of life is one of the key elements that we talk about throughout the high holidays. So we are hoping that before Yom Kippur concludes, God took a pen and wrote our names in the book of life. Now, granted, this is a metaphor. God's not actually sitting there with a big book and writing everything down and putting your name in or leaving your name out. Yes, question. Yes, Kathy. Unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, I was just adjusting the camera. Continue.
Oh, that's okay. I thought you had a question and I didn't see it. Okay, that's all right. No problem. So anyway, so we've got this judge, we've got God judging us. And this period that we call the days of awe, these 10 days, these holiest days on our Jewish calendar, are our chance to see, examine ourselves, look inward, because these are supposed to be introspective times, and see whether we have any doubts about our worthiness. Do we feel like we are ready to have our names in the book of life? If we have any doubt at all that maybe we are not worthy, we're not ready for that, we have these 10 days. And in these 10 days, we are supposed to make teshuvah. Teshuvah, which means to turn. And some rabbis will say it means to return. We are turning back to God, or we are returning to God to hopefully, once again, have ourselves in good stead with God. So as God is metaphorically writing those names in the book of life, he is going to include our name along with everybody else, because that is ultimately our goal throughout this period of the high holidays, for us to hopefully make things right with God. And we know that part of making things right with God is also making things right with our fellow human beings, the people we interact with in our families, in our workplaces, wherever we happen to be, that's a part of it too, because God is represented in each and every one of them. Because remember, we are all made in God's image. So we have those 10 days, which is really, when you think about it, God is pretty generous. He could just give us one day. You could say, it's Rosh Hashanah, that's it. You're either ready or you're not. You're either in good shape or you're not. But he gives us that 10-day period to examine our hearts, our minds, and look inward and see, are we really ready? And if we are not, what do we need to do to get ready? And that's part of more what we'll talk about when we get next week to Yom Kippur. But Rosh Hashanah begins that period of introspection, that period of looking inside ourselves and taking stock of where we are with God, where we are with fellow humanity, and what our place in the world is. And are we doing our best to live up to what God expects us, the precepts that he has given us in the Torah? So we have this idea of God as judge. We have a chance to make teshuvah, so that hopefully in the end, the verdict will be in our favor, that God will judge us not harshly, but God will judge us with mercy and with graciousness, because that's really what we want to do. Now, in terms of observance, most Jews, including those who live in Israel, so Jews who live in Israel, observe Rosh Hashanah for 2 days. It's a 2-day festival. You've got Rosh Hashanah day 1 and you have Rosh Hashanah day 2. However, little side note here. Most Reform Jews, most Reform synagogues only do 1 day. Another little side note. But we at Congregation Mikveh Israel, even though we are a Reform Jewish congregation, we observe 2 days. But that is fairly rare because many, if you would go to and look at websites of Reform synagogues, Reform congregations, many of them do not do a second day celebration of Rosh Hashanah, even though conservative Jews, Orthodox Jews, Reconstructionist Jews, they do. And in Israel, it is a 2-day holiday. But
Tim,
yes, yeah.
when I've been a member of Mikveh Israel, I guess since 1970, and we did not used to have 2 days. That has evolved.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
You have more of a history than I do in the synagogue. Do you remember about what time? Do you know about what time?
No, I can't remember, but I don't believe, I could be wrong because I grew up at the temple in Atlanta and we for sure didn't. But I just, having the second day service and the meal and all, that was kind of new.
Well,
I don't say real new. I probably started maybe after Rabbi Reuben. You could check with him.
I will. And I'll
Because
look at
I'm kind of curious now.
Yeah, I am too. I'm sure there's somebody who can, we have enough people who will remember the history
Yeah,
of how it evolved into a Reform congregation doing a second day of Rosh Hashanah. Well, thank you
Okay.
for sharing that with us.
Mhm.
Yes,
That
another
was
question.
all.
Pardon me? Another question out there?
Yes.
Yes, okay, yeah.
Why did Mikvah decide to do this?
That's what they were talking.
That's what I'm going to find out. I'm on a mission. One of my goals tomorrow is to do a little digging into the history of Mikveh Israel and find out when they started a second day celebration of Rosh Hashanah and what was the reasoning behind it, since it's not traditionally a Reform thing. I know there are a few other Reform congregations that do, but it's not usual in a
When
Reform.
you do that, Tim, email us because I could be like totally out in left field, but I just don't remember having the opportunity of that chance to go the second day.
Well, I will look into it. And
Yeah, and I'd love to know the answer.
Yeah, I would. Well, I do too, because I can't wait to find out. Yes, Maureen.
Tim, just as a little aside, that's actually one of the reasons we joined 3 years ago, was because of the second day.
Oh, interesting. That's an
So,
interesting thing to know too. Why not?
Just a
We were used to it, so.
Okay. Yes, Maureen.
the question about holidays being 2 days. I'd always heard of that as being because of uncertainty about the date. Although if that were the case, you would think you would go with one on each side, and maybe 3 days is too much. But am I correct that it is because of the old uncertainty?
Well, it's true. And that's why in Israel, some of the holidays that are 2 days in the diaspora are only 1 day in Israel, because we couldn't, in days before we had modern timekeeping and clocks and whatever, we could not know exactly precisely when in Israel it was time to begin the holiday. So in order to cover ourselves and make sure that we weren't violating the Torah and not celebrating as we should, we added the second day. And then a lot of Reform congregations said, now we have a great way of telling time, keeping time. We don't need the second day. So yes, that is very much a part of how things got started, was a whole issue of timing. And when we had to look at the stars and the alignment and whatever, and it wasn't always precise. And once it was precise in Israel, they had to pass the word through the diaspora that, okay, it's time to celebrate whichever holiday. Well, so you gave yourself that extra cushion of a day by adding a second day to the holiday. But Rosh Hashanah is 2 days in Israel. It's really pretty much the Reform movement that dropped it to 1 day, but I'm going to make it a mission to find out how it Mikveh Israel, it came to 2 days, when and how and why, and I'll ask all those great journalistic questions, how, when, why. Okay, so that's just a little bit about observance of the holiday. It is a full holiday. We are, as you heard in the Torah, we are not to work, just like we are not to work on Shabbat. We are to take time away from our regular endeavors, our jobs and whatever. Clearly, the synagogue service for the High Holy Days is longer than a traditional Shabbat service because we have new prayers that are added. Music is intensified. We have particular high holiday melodies that are added, new liturgical texts that are read. So it does cause for a longer service. I mean, I believe that, our Rosh Hashanah service in the morning usually started around 10, and it seemed like we were usually leaving synagogue around, 12:15, 12:30. So 2.5 hours. And that seems to be pretty fair with different synagogues that I've attended. Last thing before we get into the main themes is the Machzor. Many of you probably know already that the Machzor, and it means cycle. The word Machzor in Hebrew actually means cycle. The Machzor is the special High Holy Day prayer book. No, we don't use the Shabbat prayer books for the High Holy Days. It gets its own special liturgy in a special prayer book that we use only for that period. Now, it can be all contained in one prayer book where you've got Rosh Hashanah and then you've got Yom Kippur, or as with the Mishkan Tefillah, the most up-to-date modern of the Reformed prayer books, they split it into two prayer books. You've got one Machzor that's just Rosh Hashanah, and you've got one Machzor that is just Yom Kippur. But that's what the Machzor is. It's a special prayer book for the High Holy Days. That's the only time we use them. It has the added prayers. It has added meditations that are on the themes of the High Holy Days, which are not contained in the Shabbat liturgy, even though a lot of what's in a Shabbat liturgy is also in a Rosh Hashanah and a Yom Kippur liturgy. All right, let's move on to the major themes. And then I got the handouts here and we'll look at a couple just things. So when we are looking at the themes of Rosh Hashanah, and again, this idea of it being sort of like an opening day of a court. And we, as we stand there saying these prayers, we are standing in God's courtroom, and we know that we are standing there, and it's a sort of judgment that God is going to render traditionally. I mean, we know now it's a little bit more of a metaphor, but that's the basic idea. So there are three main themes, and I have them there for you. The first one is Malchiot. Malchiot. What does Malchiot means? Well, in a sexist world, it means kingship. Kingship. In a not sexist world, it means sovereign. In either case, we're talking about royalty. We're talking about royalty. So, but the word technically, it's from the same background as Malkeinu. In Avinu Malkeinu, Malchiot means kingship, or we oftentimes now use the term sovereign, so it's not sexist language. So one of the main themes then is God as the sovereign, God as the king, God as the ruler over all of us. So you see this idea of sovereign, ruling God throughout much of the High Holy Day liturgy on Rosh Hashanah. And as I said, even the most common, most well-known hymn of the High Holy Days, Avinu Malkeinu, remember, we repeat our Father, our King over and over again as we sing the different verses of that very, very beautiful prayer. So as we are preparing to stand before God, knowing that God is somehow bigger than us, greater than us, yes, God is the ruler of us ultimately, we have to sort of humble ourselves a little bit as we stand there, because we are in no way equal to God as sovereign or equal to God as king. Now, if you look at the handout that I gave you that says Malchiot, spelled differently because we have Hebrew transliteration and spellings don't always agree. It's the one that is on page 200. I pulled this out because we have these themes clearly delineated in the Rosh Hashanah service. If you look at the beginning of that Malchiot, accepting your sovereignty prayer, it says, we are stiff-necked and stubborn. And those are words directly from the Torah that Moses says to the people. Teach us to bend before you. If you go down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 little paragraphs or verses, teach us to bend our knees, to bow our heads before the mystery, to realize our frailty and our finitude, Teach us to make you melech, there's the word again, sovereign in our life. And the last verse, we would not bow before Pharaoh. We would not bow before the Persian Lord. We would not submit to any power on earth or give ourselves to any material thing. But we, the Jewish people, stiff-necked, stubborn to the end, today we bow before you. Because there's this old tradition. Jews don't bow to earthly sovereigns. We do not bow before those, the only person who can command us to bow, and the only person that we bow before, well, not person, is God. We do not bow. We didn't for Pharaoh. We didn't to other lords that are supposed to be rulers, but to God we must humble ourselves. We must realize that God is bigger, greater, and therefore teach us that we must bend our knees, we must bow before you. Think back to Shabbat service. This is kind of a theme too when we pray the Aleinu. Remember how we bend and bow during a certain part of the Aleinu prayer? It's a similar idea, because before God as king, before God as sovereign, God as ruler, we bow. So that is one of the major themes of the High Holy Days. So as you listen to the prayers, remind yourself that every time it comes up as God is ruler, God is king, God is sovereign, that is one of the major themes that we stress during the Rosh Hashanah service. Any question about that? And this is actually from the prayer book. I pulled this directly from the Machzor for Rosh Hashanah from the Mishkan Anefesh. Yes, Flossie.
I remember as a child, we went to an Orthodox shul. People, not just how you picture bending, but getting almost down on the floor and really bend, well, I should say, I wouldn't call that bending, I prostrate, you know.
Yes.
What is that? Is that more the Orthodox do? Our interpretation of bending is different?
Well, that's pulling directly from the old days of Temple Judaism, when the high priest would enter the Holy of Holies, and they would literally prostrate themselves on the ground, because that was the only time that they would show that so much reverence as to get completely on the ground. So there are those in Orthodox synagogues and extremely ultra-Orthodox who will actually literally almost lay on the floor. And in some Orthodox synagogues, the cantor, as a representative of all the people present, all the people worshiping, will actually prostrate himself on the floor.
Yeah.
But it's not something you will see at Mikveh Israel. Although I was told that one year there were a couple of people who attended services who actually did get into the aisleway and sort of do that before I was there. So I don't know if you were there for that service, but that's what I was told. It may be just a rumor, I don't know.
It's so crowded, I don't know how they had room.
I was gonna say, you really have to go find space to do it.
Really, even in the aisle.
Exactly. So that's one of the first themes. All right, the second theme is Zikronot, and Zikronot means remembrance. Remember, at the beginning of this, we talked about Rosh Hashanah is often called the day of remembrance, Yom HaZikaron. So that theme, the idea of remembering, is very, very important in the service as well. And it's remembering on a couple of different levels. Again, if you go to the prayer that I sent you, it's the one that's page 263. It says Zikronot, discerning the compassionate presence. If you go through there, it's almost like a little brief history of people from the Torah and things that we as Jews early in our history were through, because it mentions the flood in the third line down. After the flood, in the wake of destruction, Noah discovered the rainbow. And then right below that, alone on a mountain, a knife in his hand, remember the binding of Isaac, Abraham heard the voice of compassion. And the line below that, at the end of her strength, afraid for her child, Hagar found a well in the wilderness. So remembering these people from the Torah, and when it looked like everything was just going awry and all might be lost, there was God. There was the rainbow. There was God telling Abraham not to go through taking Isaac's life. There was Hagar who found a well, something to sustain her and her child. And for down below, then it says, a rock gives forth water, as we were wandering in the wilderness. And yes, Moses didn't listen directly to what God said, but he was able to get water from a rock. And so God is part of remembrance. We are remembering our history, but there's also something about this part of remembrance that's more personal. We are hoping that God remembers us, that God will look and remember us, and remember that we have hopefully done our best, tried our best to be good people, to be good Jews, to remember the good things, the compassionate things, the gracious things that we did, because we see God was gracious in this prayer. We see that God was good. Now, it's kind of odd because God is not human. So does God really, like a human, have to remember? We're sort of giving God this trait that is a very human kind of trait. Well, God doesn't need that, but we have to understand it in terms that make sense to us. So metaphorically, as we pray, we are remembering our history and all the times that God intervened with compassion, when God helped out at a time when things were looking really, really bleak. And now we are hoping that God will remember and do the same thing for us. As we stand there and pray and remember, we hope that God remembers us and our intentions to live up to the precepts of the Torah and what God expects of us. Not that we're perfect. We know we're not perfect. We will never be perfect. But we hope that God will see past our imperfections and remember us for the good that we've done and for the way that we have tried to live up what God expects of us. And if you look at the second page of this prayer, it talks about God remembering the covenant. And that is the covenant that God made with us long ago when we accepted the Torah. We said, yes, we will accept the Torah, and we have this covenant with God, and we want God to remember that. We accepted your Torah. We have done our best to live by the words of the Torah. So please try to remember us for good. So any questions on Zikronot? Okay, so that is the second of the three main themes. And then the third one is shofarot, which of course is the shofar, which we all know, the ram's horn. We all know what the blowing of the shofar sounds like. It's something that separates, uniquely, in the synagogue. We have some people that we wait for it. We want to hear it. You should know, I don't know how many of you know this, but it is a commandment. It's one of the 613 mitzvot to hear the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. If you are not where you can hear the shofar being blown on Rosh Hashanah, you are breaking one of the 613 commandments. So it is a commandment that we must hear the blowing of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. But symbolically, what does the blowing of the shofar mean? We know what it sounds like. We know what it looks like. We know that it's something that is unique to the high holy days, but there is also, like everything in Judaism, there is more symbolism attached to it. It actually represents new beginnings. It represents the chance for a new start, a chance to renew ourselves and jump in with a clean slate, if you will. So that blowing of the shofar, that stark sound, and I don't know how many of you have ever tried to blow a shofar. It takes a lot of lung power. I've tried, failed miserably, I will freely admit that, to do it. And I admire people who can. We've got some amazing people at Mikveh Israel who are amazing shofar blowers. And all I have to say is my hat's off to them when they can get those notes and out there loud and clear. But it's not easy. If you ever get a chance, try it. Good luck, and be ready with a big glass of water when you're finished too. And sit down and take some deep breaths. So if you look at the third prayer that I sent you, the one that starts on page 205, where it says Kavanot focusing meditations for the sounding of the shofar, you can see how this idea of new beginnings is actually here in this prayer. If you look down where it says part 2, Below where it says tekiah, 1 whole note, shivarim, teruah, 3 broken notes, 9 staccato notes, tekiah, 1 whole note. And then look at the verses there. My return to the right path has the power to make me whole again. So there's the whole idea of renewal, that we have this chance to begin again. Tekiah, once I was whole, that 1 long note, I was whole. Shivarim teruah, in the wear and tear of living, I became broken and shattered. Tekiah, my teshuvah has the power to make me whole again. And then it says, blessed are hearts that respond to the majestic music of the shofar. Blessed is the gift of life, the power of renewal that brings us to this day. So beyond just the majesty of hearing it and waiting for it as part of the service, it does represent for us the chance to renew. And that is, again, because God is compassionate, because God wants to give us those 10 days for teshuvah and to make things right with him and to make things right with everybody around us. And then you'll notice that the second page of that prayer, we actually say a blessing, much like we do over Shabbat candles or Yom Tov candles, which we'll do for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lishmoah kol shofar. And then we say the Shehekianu, which we do always at times of joy, when we are celebrating, when the rabbi at services has people stand up and talk about anniversaries, birthdays and promotions and other good things. And then we as a congregation celebrate that by reciting the Shehekianu, because that's part of Jewish tradition when we have heard good news, when we are at a happy time, when we are at a happy space. So you can see how this prayer, and again, taken right directly from the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah, clearly talks about the idea of being made new again, after we have suffered. Any questions on the 3 themes that's going through your head? Yes.
Rabbi, well, he is my rabbi. He's my teacher.
My rabbi, and I don't play one on TV.
Okay, well, you're doing a wonderful job explaining. And my question is, if it's so important for us to hear the shofar, is the person who blows the shofar considered doing quite a mitzvah?
Yes.
We're able, all right. So it's quite an honor for them to do that. And okay.
Because if we don't have these people who, stand up there and blow the shofar for us, then we can't fulfill the mitzvot.
Right.
We will not be able to actually do what God has commanded, and that is hear the blowing of the shofar. So that is a special mitzvah. It is a special gift that they give to the congregation, whatever congregation they're in, so that all of us that are in there saying our prayers and at the service can actually hear the shofar. It's also, this is going to sound perhaps a little simplistic or maybe even a little crass, but as we know, there are 2 days of the year when synagogues are packed to overflowing. And that's Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And certainly part of that dates back to, I need to hear the blowing of the shofar. I may not go to synagogue any other time. I may consider myself a very secular Jew who doesn't really, get into much of the religiosity of it, but I need to hear the blowing of the shofar. And what's the other thing they'll celebrate? Passover. Because it is, believe it or not, it is a commandment on Passover to eat matzah.
Oh,
You
but
must
do you
eat
have
matzah.
do you have to be in a Seder to eat it?
No, you could kind of do your own little thing, your own little mini Seder by yourself. But to Jews, one of the most important things is that celebration of freedom. So even, again, Jews who are not necessarily considered religious, or they don't consider themselves religious, they somehow will go to a Seder. So 3 times in the year where Jews have this need, it's almost like it's within you, this need to make sure I hear the blowing of the shofar. So I'm going to be at synagogue for the High Holy Days. And I need to have the matzah, and I need to remember the freedom, and I need that connection with the Haggadah for Passover. So I'm going to go to a Seder, we know that in Christianity, there are those who are only connected to their congregation for Christmas and Easter. You know, I'm going to be there on Christmas. I'm going to be there on Easter. So other religions have their days where people feel compelled to be a part of the congregation, when the rest of the year, it doesn't really matter so much.
Tim,
Tim,
I
I don't want to judge
remember-
those people. You know,
I
sound-
remember, oh, no, okay. If you want to talk, and then I'll bring up what I wanted
In
to.
terms of each of the sounds of the shofar, is there a basis in tradition of the interpretation here of the whole notes and and the broken notes and staccato notes, or is this a modern interpretation, or is
no, it was also, I mean, even going back into, you know, more ancient literature of people who are sages and rabbis, there was a reason why we did not have just strong, long notes, you know, where it was different, because there is the symbolism of brokenness and then the symbolism of wholeness. And then, of course, the long Tekiah Gadolah, where they try to hold it as long as they can as sort of representative of moving in now to this new period in our lives where we have had this chance to be renewed. And, you know, those people who could hold that note, pretty impressive, I have to say. All right, any other questions? Okay, now we move into something that is one of the prayers that bothers some people. People find it outdated. People find it certainly maybe not particularly relevant anymore, but yet in some ways it is, and that's the Unatana Tokef prayer. Now, before we get to, actually, in Utanana Tokef in Hebrew means, let us describe the power. So here's back to this idea of ruler, power. Let us describe the power. That's what Unatana Tokef means in Hebrew. Now, this prayer is not in the Torah. It didn't exist in the times of Temple Judaism. It didn't even exist at the times of Rabbinic Judaism. It really did not come into the liturgy, we think, and again, where we don't have a lot of definition that this is exactly when it came into the service, but sometime around the 11th century. So it's old. I mean, 11th century, you know, is slightly, you know, before I was born, but it's old. So it's an old prayer, but it's not from the Torah. It's not from the beginnings of Rabbinic Judaism, like so many of our prayers are. So how did it get into the service? There's a lot of legends and not a lot of, as I said, definite facts here. So I'm going to share a legend with you that's kind of strange, but you don't have to, just because I think this is an interesting story. So allegedly, because it is a legend, this was actually composed by an 11th century rabbi whose name was Rabbi Amnon of Mainz. Mainz is a city in Germany. Nobody knows anything about him other than this particular legend. He doesn't seem to exist other than in this legend, which is why there are question marks here, because most of our other sages, you can find other things about them in the history of Judaism. This guy, he's here for this, and then it just goes silent for whatever reason. So he was actually a friend of the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Mainz. Okay, so, however, the Archbishop, the Roman Catholic Archbishop, was pressuring this Rabbi Amnon, to convert to Catholicism. Well, this bothered Rabbi Amnon, and he was trying to stall. He didn't want to anger the Archbishop, so he tried to buy a little time. So he said, you know, well, give me some time to consider it. I need a few days to consider your offer of conversion. And as soon as he got home, he regretted this. He goes, I should have never led the Archbishop on. I shouldn't have even said that maybe I'll do this. So he really was very torn by what he had said to the Archbishop. But he said, I got to go back. I got to confront the Archbishop. So after spending some days in prayer and trying to avoid the Archbishop, they came and got him. The Archbishop's minions came and forcibly brought him to the Archbishop's residence. And he said, I can't do it. I know you want me to convert. He says, I can't do it. He said, I just can't do it. I would rather you cut out my tongue for the sin I told you by making you believe that I might do it. So just cut out my tongue. And the Archbishop was so angry, he said, no. We are not going to cut out your tongue. we are going to amputate your hands and legs. Okay, so they did. They amputated this poor rabbi's legs and his arms as punishment for not living up to the word that he told the archbishop he might convert.
And
And
you guys were friends?
I know friends like this who needs enemies, right? I mean, he turned on his friend pretty quickly, I guess. So once more, even now that they had done this to him, they gave him one final opportunity to convert, and he said, absolutely not. Now, this event allegedly took place shortly before Rosh Hashanah. As this poor rabbi lay in pain and dying, he asked to be carried to the synagogue one more time before he died. And it is said that when they carried him, obviously, into the synagogue, he recited the Utana Tokef prayer. And that is sort of a legend as to where this prayer came from. I don't know how much of it I believe. It's an interesting sort of story, I guess, but it's sort of shrouded in mystery. I mean, it seems highly unlikely that this poor rabbi who had lied to the archbishop or led him on and would not convert would all of a sudden just make up this prayer, go to the synagogue and just recite it. But maybe, I don't know. But since we have no other knowledge of him anywhere in Jewish history, there's nothing else that's recorded about him, it seems highly suspect. But it's something you can share with your friends if you would like. Anyway, so looking at the prayer, this prayer that says, let us describe the power. We say this prayer, we recite this prayer standing before the ark, and the ark is open. Okay, so, and we know that traditionally, out of respect, we stand in synagogue when the ark is open. And the prayer, we'll look at a few pieces of it in a minute. The prayer has sort of this very, very visual, vivid sort of reckoning of judgment within it, that sort of God is supposed to mete out during the days of awe. The imagery is a little jarring. The image, or maybe a lot jarring actually. The imagery is a bit stark. And so for us as modern Jews, it does not ring particularly true with us. We really sort of have to step back from it and look at it again, as we do with a lot of things. We have to look at it as a little bit more of a metaphor, because we cannot believe literally. And it's a rather lengthy prayer, which, as a side note, a lot of Moxors, including the Reform Moxor, have cut it down. They do a little shortened version rather than the entire prayer. So just know that when you get to it, you may not, this is the entire prayer that I sent to you, but in many Moxors of the prayer books for High Holy Days, it is edited down, it is abbreviated. But if you take a look at it, let's just look at a couple of things here. We do have the idea of sovereign and king in this prayer. If you look at the third line down, your kingship is exalted upon it, your throne is established in mercy, you are enthroned upon it in truth. So here again is the imagery of God as king, God is sovereign. Jump down about 4 lines below, you are enthroned upon it in truth, and we have the idea of remembrance here. Remembering all that is forgotten, you open the book of remembrance, which proclaims itself, and the seal of each person is there. So there's the other theme of remembrance. And if you go about 4 or 5 lines down from there, still on page 1, as they proclaim, behold the day of judgment. Judgment. Are we going to have that renewal? Are we going to be judged that we have renewed ourselves? For all the hosts of heaven are brought for judgment. So here's that chance for teshuva, the chance to renew yourself. And then let's go to page 2. And here's where it gets a little dicey. Okay, so if you look at the 3rd line down, on Rosh Hashanah, it is inscribed, because remember, God is writing in the book of life. And on Yom Kippur is a seal, because that's when the book is going to be closed. How many shall pass away and how many shall be born? Who shall live and who shall die? Who shall reach the end of his days? and who shall not? Who shall perish by water and who by fire? Who by sword and who by wild beast? Who by famine and who by thirst? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangulation and who by stoning? Who shall have rest and who shall wander? Who shall be at peace and who shall be pursued? Who shall be at rest and who shall be tormented? Who shall be exalted and who shall be brought low? Who shall become rich and who shall be impoverished? But, and here's the idea of making teshuvah and having a new start, but repentance, prayer, and righteousness avert the severe decree. So if we don't want any of these bad things we just listed here to happen to us, we don't want to be on the bad side of it, we want to be on the good side of it, we have the chance through repentance, which is what these 10 days are all about, by the prayers that we say, and by righteousness, the good things we do, our good deeds, and then God will not judge us harshly, and we will not end up on the bad side of it. But when you think about standing, in the synagogue before the open ark in these rather, jarring images, who's going to die by strangulation and who's going to die by stoning? Like, really? Really? I mean, it's a jarring image. And we can kind of understand that we're trying to really, hammer home the idea of, this is what today is all about. And if you don't want bad things to happen to you and you want your name in the book of life, then you know what? You've got the chance here. So repent, pray, and do good deeds, because that's what God is looking for. So it's a rather interesting prayer. It has an interesting history that is mostly sort of unknown. But again, when we get to it, it used to be said only on Rosh Hashanah, but now it is part of both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So you will see it in both liturgies. And I'm not sure exactly when that switch was made, but as you saw in the legend, it was originally done in Rosh Hashanah service, but now it is actually done for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And you can kind of see why, given what the prayer says. Where does it fall in the service? Interestingly enough, it is placed in the service just before the Kedusha, the prayer that sanctifies the name of God. So we have this stark imagery, and then we're going to go immediately into a prayer that is sanctifying God's name. So there's our chance to pray, and there's our chance to begin that renewal. With the prayer where we have, Kadosh, 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 that prayer, that follows immediately after we have just done this very, very stark prayer. So that's the placement in the liturgy for this prayer. And as I said, I pulled this from a different site. I did not take this out of the prayer book because I wanted you to see the whole thing. When you look at it in the Union Prayer Book, the High Holiday edition for that, or in the Mishkan HaNefesh, you will see a shortened version. We don't get quite the whole big long thing here, but it's just kind of interesting to look at. So any questions about that? Yes. Yeah.
And this is something, that one of the things I kind of have problems with, because it really, the whole idea of just having this 10-day period and that determines the next year really seems out of sync with Jewish theology, and with Jewish ethics, where I mean, I don't take this literally, but even so, find it difficult and unpleasant, not just in terms of the aspect of this determining whether you're going to live or die the next year, but sort of the determinism of everything about the year, depending on how you live through the high holidays. So I'm curious as to your perspective on that.
Well, I have a kind of a somewhat similar perspective. I mean, these are celebrations that are still came out of temple Judaism, when people would go to the temple and the high priest would prostrate themselves and go into the Holy of Holies. And it was supposed to be sort of a reckoning, whereas, okay, if you've not been thinking about these things for the whole year, as you probably should be, and how you're living in life and where you stand with your maker, with God or whatever, this was the one stark reminder that if you weren't doing it all year, you better be doing it right now. And you better get your act together. So you can kind of understand where, okay, we got to pull the people together. We're going to have these big special days, and we really got to get them on the right path. It does sort of a little bit fly in the face of our modern theology of Judaism, for sure, when we try to all the time live in good stead with the precepts of the Torah and God. But then I think, is there something so bad about, I mean, these are supposed to be days where we are supposed to be, it's supposed to be a little bit different. The fact that we fast on Yom Kippur, the fast that, yes, we make a real effort to get to synagogue on those days. So they are different. And I guess I'm okay with the idea of setting aside a time of difference that is a little different from the rest of the year, that does force us into maybe a different kind of mindset. So I can understand both sides of it. I had someone tell me once, fairly recently, that who says, I consider myself a very good Jew. I consider myself a practicing Jew. But he actually said, and I'm just going to say what he said to me. He says, I have never set foot in a synagogue on the high holy days. Never. Never. He goes, I'll go to Shabbat. He goes, I'll go for other celebrations, but I have never set foot in he goes, because I just can't abide all of that language and all of that, beating your breast and the sinning and the sticks. I just can't do it. I'm like, well, I'm not here to judge you. That's your choice. I don't know. It's interesting. And you're not the first person who says, I do have some trouble with this. It bothers me, and I can see it. It's some of the imagery is very stark and not necessarily very beautiful, yet there are other prayers. Like, to me, as I think I said the one day, I think every time I hear Avinu Malkeinu and we sing Avinu Malkeinu, it just stirs something in me. It does. I can't help it. It just does. I can't explain it. I just know that it does when I hear that melody, So anybody else, comments, questions?
Well, Tim, I really think that religion is a very, of course, personal thing, and one size does not fit all.
Oh, no.
And you make your choice, what works for you and what brings you inner peace. And really being a good person, you don't judge other people for what they believe.
Exactly. And that's why I would not tell this person, I think you're wrong for not going to the high holy days, because that's a choice you have made and it works for you. And it's between you and God. And I am not here to be God and sit in judgment of you. And one of the things that the beauties of Reformed Judaism, as I say all the time, we are informed. As Reformed Jews, we are informed Jews. And having that information allows us to figure out for each of us what works and what makes sense, what makes us spiritual, what makes us feel like we're closer to God, what makes us feel like we're living a good life. And person A and person B may have different concepts of that, but as long as they're both doing their best and trying their best, I have no argument with it. So, yes. All right, just to kind of go through some final things here, the mirror Jewish themes of Rosh Hashanah that come out. There are the Jewish themes that are just sort of our major themes anyway, and that is creation, because remember, this is the birthday of the world. Revelation, because God gave us the Torah, revealed the Torah to us, which is sort of our highway or our guidepost to living a good life. And it reflects the theme of redemption, that we don't have to consider ourselves bad people and banished forever. There's a way for us to get back. If we have lost our way, there is a way for us to get back, and that's part of what these high holy days are about. So creation, revelation, and redemption are the major themes in Judaism as a faith, as a community, and they are all reflected in what we see in the Rosh Hashanah prayers and the Rosh Hashanah service. As much as some of the imagery is stark, there's still that element of hope there, that we have that element of hope, that we can be redeemed. So it's just kind of interesting. All right, we're going to end with Rosh Hashanah customs, which most of you probably know, but it will be bad to review a couple things here. Of course, the traditional greeting, the customary greeting for Rosh Hashanah is many people just say Lashana Tova, which is, have a good year. Some people add the little end of it, Umetuka Tika Tevu, which is may you be inscribed for a good and sweet year. But, you know, a Shana Tova or La Shana Tova is certainly enough. And you can say it in English. If you're not comfortable with saying it in Hebrew, you can say Happy New Year, or may you have a sweet New Year, whatever, because the idea of sweetness is very much present in much of the customs and much of the symbolism of Rosh Hashanah. And that leads me to number 2, when you're talking about food for Rosh Hashanah, and who doesn't like to talk about food? I know I always do. We dip apple slices. Apple slices are dipped in honey, which is a great little treat. And it's symbolic, of course. It's a symbolism of hope for a sweet new year. So you will always have sliced apples and honey, which of course you have bought from the Mikveh Israel Sisterhood. I'll give a little plug there. So you can have that treat. It's something certainly children enjoy. And of course, apples start to become ripe at this time of year, interestingly enough, too. Having grown up in the Midwest, near not far from Michigan, where there are lots of apple trees, this time of year you go apple picking, and you could have apples that you actually picked yourself, which was always kind of a great treat. Still on the area of food, we have honey cake. Is a very, very traditional Rosh Hashanah dessert. And again, the sweetness idea, the idea of honey cake representing the notion of let's hope for a sweet new year for everybody, for all of us. And there are a lot of different recipes for honey cake. I've tried some. I'm going to be real honest. I have never made a successful one. Mine always tastes like you need to have a lot of water or coffee, because mine always tastes so dry. My honey cake is dry. I don't know what I do wrong. And I've tried different recipes. So, you know, it's just not my thing. I've had some really good ones that other people have made, but I just have not mastered the art of a good honey cake. We also have a challah that is round. Rather than doing the traditional braided challah that we do the rest of the year for Shabbat, we actually use a round that is a challah that is sort of in a round or braided in a round. And this is kind of symbolic of 2 different things, at least according to what our rabbinic sages tell us. It represents, like a circle represents continuity, never ending. We keep going and going. There's no real beginning and there is no real end. Others say that the round challah also gets back into our symbolism of Malchuyot, because it represents a crown for God as sovereign. You know, and I've seen some pretty cool round challahs that I thought you could probably put that on your head. You know, if you wanted, you might look silly, but you could probably do it. But it's still challah, and it still tastes delicious. And of course, we do blessings like we do for Shabbat with candles and wine and challah. That does not change. We do that for all of our holidays, Shabbat being our weekly holiday. I'm going to jump down to Tashlik before I get to the meal. Tashlik. Okay, you all know, if you don't know what Tashlik is, or you've never attended Tashlik, again, all symbolism. You go to a body of water. Traditionally, it should be a moving body of water, stream, lake, river, you know, whatever. And we have plenty of those in the area here, in the Savannah area. And then you take little crumbs or pieces of bread and you cast them into the water. And then it's supposed to be symbolic of, the bread symbolizes the casting away of your sins. Since that's what this period is all about, we use bread. And, you know, there are lots of cute little writings where different kinds of bread represent different kinds of sin. Now, I'll just throw this out there, ecologically minded Jews who do not want to damage the ecology, say, don't throw bread. Don't throw bread.
What do you say?
Throw little pebbles or little stones instead. Because apparently the bread technically isn't really good for the ducks. I don't know enough about it, but I've been reading that more and more, that congregations are giving people little pebbles or stones and having them cast in the water. Now, interestingly enough, if you cannot get to a body of water, if you can't, because either you're landlocked or there's just no way, you know, wherever you live, you can't get to it, it is perfectly acceptable to do tashlik in your kitchen sink. And I'm not making that up. I am not making that up. You can turn on the tap water, stand at your sink and do tashlik, and it is just acceptable, according to the rabbis, as standing at a lake or a river or a stream or whatever. So to
The
remember,
body of water.
Yeah, it's water. And if it goes down the drain, it's going to take, I guess, the crumbs with it. So they are being cast away. They are being, whisked or swirled away from you. I don't know that I would stand over a toilet and do it. That seems a bit much, but certainly a sink. I guess you could fill your bathtub with a little water and do that, and then drain it if you wanted to do that as well. But I did not make this up. This is true. The rabbis say if you want to perform tashlik, it's perfectly acceptable to do so at your kitchen sink.
But you have to do it on the side with the disposal so the crumbs will go down the disposal.
Be very practical when you do your sink version of tashlik. Yes, Flossie.
Where did the idea of crumbs come in with bread? Because it would be, to me, more logical. Stones are around pebbles to do rather than bread.
I think because, it was bread, people had bread around, and before modern ways of keeping things fresh, I'm sure there was probably some stale bread pretty handy, in the home somewhere. So let's just take this stale bread, crumbs very easily. So you could easily get quite a large number of breadcrumbs to share with your family, your relatives, friends, whatever. That's what I'm thinking. The last thing I want to say about tashlik is there's no liturgy for tashlik. None. There's no booklet that we go to and say, here's the liturgy. Every rabbi, every synagogue, every congregation has to make up their own. So the one we do at Mikveh Israel is something that Rabbi Haas put together a couple of years ago and put into a little booklet. Because you can't go to any prayer book. It's not in the Machzor for the High Holy Days. It's not in the regular prayer book for Shabbat. So people just kind of create their own little liturgy for it, prayers to say.
How long have they been doing tashlik?
Tashlik goes back to the Middle Ages.
Really? Middle
Yep.
Ages. And when you're talking about around challah, when you're talking sweetness, is that putting the raisins in?
Some people, if you like, I don't like raisins, so I never put raisins in challah. But if you like raisins, yes, you can put raisins in. But some people don't like raisins. I may be in the minority here, but I'm just not a raisin fan. I never have.
No, when you
Yes.
said, Tim,
Pardon me?
creation, I missed the third one, creation, revelation, and what's the third one?
Redemption.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, and then let's talk about the festive meal. I'm sure that in your household, with your families, you have traditions of what you eat for Rosh Hashanah, whether that might be a delicious brisket, yum, perhaps a roast chicken, yum, maybe you even do a turkey, I don't know. It's your own family. There's no prescribed meal. It's up to whatever is in the family tradition. My issue, and I'll just bring this up, I always had an issue. Now, I didn't belong to a synagogue like Mikveh Israel where we have so many, we used to have so many meals. We could go eat and then go to service. We didn't have that in most of the synagogues I've been to. So what we would do is we would have to make dinner at home, have friends, family, whatever, and then, oh my gosh, look at the watch, gotta get to synagogue. And you would just leave everything. And then you would come home to a mess. Dishes on the table, sink piled. Oh, unless you were lucky enough to hire somebody to come in and do it for you, which I did do. So one year, I'm just going to throw this out here as an idea for anybody that might want to run with it when we can get back to groups and having dinner or whatever. One year we decided, you know what? Rosh Hashanah service is over about 12:15, 12:30. Isn't 12:15, 12:30 a perfect time for a brunch? So we started inviting people over for Rosh Hashanah brunch. Rather than try to rush a meal and guests and whatever, before services on Rosh Hashanah, we would do something small and simple at home ourselves. And then after services on Rosh Hashanah day, we're not supposed to work. We're supposed to be enjoying the day. We're supposed to be mingling with our loved ones. We would invite people over and we would do a Rosh Hashanah brunch. So that's an idea you might want to try sometime, just to do something different. And then you're not worried about watching the clock or looking at your watch, having to rush off to services, at the synagogue. You can be as leisurely as you want. If you, make another pot of coffee, have another slice of challah. If you're serving mimosas, have another mimosa. Just be careful if you're driving home, not to over imbibe, etc. So
Tim,
Go ahead.
I find it kind of strange, the meal that they have the second day. It's like a Thanksgiving meal.
Mm-hmm. It was, I know, it was.
I never have understood why they do that. And they wouldn't have things more traditional like brisket or, roast chicken or things you'd think about in Timmets and,
Right, Timmins, traditional, the more traditionally Ashkenazic Jewish kind of
right.
cuisine. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know how that tradition started where a turkey dinner became second day Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, we're not doing it this year. I will say, having partaken of the dinner, it's delicious.
Everything Brian does is delicious.
Right. And I mean, but he does an amazing turkey. I mean, I would hire him because it's so good. And his stuffing, I want some right now. I'm getting hungry. But anyway, I don't know how the Mikveh Israel tradition of the turkey sort of it's almost like getting you ready for Thanksgiving, which is still, a couple months off. Or it's a little taste of Thanksgiving before Thanksgiving even begins. But it's just, I guess, something that he started doing, and he must have gotten a great response to it and just continued doing it. So, a lot of traditions. But my number one thing tomorrow is to figure out when and how and why Mikveh Israel went to a 2-day Rosh Hashanah service, because I did not know that was not a tradition from the get-go. Any final thoughts, questions from anybody here about anything that came up today or that's floating through your brain? Yeah,
Sam,
Ozzy.
thank you. You did a beautiful job of bringing it all together. And for someone who celebrated for years, you gave me such answers I never knew before. So I thank you for all your research. And one little teeny question.
Yes.
Years ago, I remember with blowing of the shofar, it was one person blowing. The past few years, I have seen where they have a lot of people blowing, and including bar mitzvah boys. And who came up with that idea? Is it to bring them part of it or give them the mitzvah? Or
I think we had people who wanted to do it. I think there was some people who actually step up and said, we would like to blow the shofar. And there's no ruling that it has to be one, or I suppose if you had a great congregation with 7 or 8, you could have a whole chorus of shofar blowers doing it. It's supposed to be loud, and the fact that we can place them at different places in the congregation also ensures that everybody gets to really hear those powerful blasts of the shofar rather than just up on the bima necessarily. Even though our sanctuary is not that big, it does create kind of a nice to hear it, coming from different directions in the congregation. So I think there was just some people who said, I would really like to blow the shofar. And I'm sure that whoever was the rabbi at the time said, well, there's no reason why we can't have more than one.
Okay.
We usually have, 3, 4 people. I know there's a young man who had a bar mitzvah a couple of years ago who does a really, really good job with it. I happened to be in the sanctuary, I think it was last year before High Holy Days, and he was practicing, and I looked up and I'm thinking, hey, this kid is, maybe 15 years old, and boy, he got a lot of volume out of that. Shofar.
Tim, I don't remember anybody but Herbert except the past couple of years.
Well, there again, somehow a new tradition was born.
Yeah, it's just been a couple of years.
Because Bubba Rosenthal does an amazing job. I mean, you look at,
It does, but
he's a little guy, and I'm thinking, whoa, kudos to you, because boy, do you get sound out of that thing.
Yeah.
Anything else before we say sayonara? Or
Thank you very much for everything. We, as always, appreciate it.
thank you. I welcome. And remember, next week will be Yom Kippur, so we'll do the same thing with that holiday as well.
You got it. Thank you so much.
Yep, you're welcome. Anything else? Everybody have a great evening. Good
You
night.
too. Oh, Caleb, hello.
All right.